Hello and welcome to your Daily Detroit. I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. It's Wednesday, March 25th, 2020.
There's a lot to cover, including a conversation about the state of our farmers and food supply system with the Michigan Farm Bureau's Ernie Birchmeier. But before that, we have stories to tell you about. Let's get started.
The rise in coronavirus cases is continuing in Michigan, as healthcare experts had sadly predicted. The state of Michigan is now up to 2,295 confirmed cases of coronavirus. That's up 28% from the figures reported on Tuesday. The number of deaths, meanwhile, jumped way up from 24 to 43. Here's the breakdown across Metro Detroit. The city of Detroit has 705 confirmed cases and 12 deaths. There are 543 cases in Oakland County and 10 deaths. In the rest of Wayne County outside of the city, there are 417 confirmed cases with 9 deaths. Macomb County clocks in with 281 cases and 7 fatalities. Out in Washtenaw County, home to Ann Arbor, my hometown, there are 72 confirmed cases and 3 deaths. We should unfortunately expect these numbers to keep rising as the coronavirus spreads and, importantly, the availability of testing improves.
Speaking of which, the city of Detroit is launching a massive drive-through testing site at the old State Fairgrounds, and the hope is it'll be a model for Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb counties. The State Fairgrounds is on Woodward, just south of 8 Mile, and it's sat mostly unused since the State Fair left town years ago. First, we'll talk about how this works, and then how this came together. To get a test, starting this Friday, you get in touch with a doctor to get a prescription. Then either you or your doctor call 313-230-0505 to make an appointment. That's 313-230-0505. Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan says they'll be able to conduct between 40 and 50 tests per hour. You come in your car. There are no walk-ups, with the windows up, and check in with someone with an iPad. The testing center will be open from 7 in the morning till 6 at night. After the test is done, results come back in 4 to 5 days. It's important to note that there's been a lot of effort behind the scenes to make this happen. Some of the highlights include that the city of Detroit made a deal with a New Jersey testing firm to get the ability to process up to 500 tests per day. The tests will be flown to New Jersey, with flights going twice a day to process them. To handle traffic flow, there needed to be a process to make it orderly. So the city worked with Quicken Loans to set up a call center to accept bookings. So people who usually take mortgage orders have now been shifted to making these coronavirus appointments. It's being paid for in part by a $300,000 grant from the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan.
Jer, so this is really interesting. And I mean, I guess I want to say good on the city, good on Quicken Loans, and this New Jersey testing firm for, coming together in a, scrambling together, frankly, to come up with a solution. I mean, a drive-through coronavirus testing is like, there's something so Detroit about that, right? And it's great. I mean, I'm in favor of anything that makes testing more widely available and accessible, but it also begs the question, like, where is the coordination on this from the federal government? There is just such a void, and it is so stark. I mean, everything to date is being coordinated by these loose associations of private sector businesses, local governments, state governments. The federal government is just glaringly absent. It is just remarkable.
It is remarkable, and it's important to note there were 8 different partners with this one to make this happen. And all of this is happening on the local level. It's kind of stunning that the city is having to go ahead and make the deal to buy these, the capacity for these tests, and that a local doctor put together 6,000 mediums to start with for these tests. It's great to see people coming together, but it's also clear that this is taking a lot of people by surprise.
A second Detroit Police Department employee has died from the coronavirus. Captain Jonathan Parnell was in his mid-50s. It was not believed that he had any underlying health issues. Parnell leaves behind 3 sons. The Detroit Police Department says it will now work with local hospitals to start tracking coronavirus cases among its officers. The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases within the Detroit Police Department is now up to 18. In light of this and the more than 200 Detroit police officers currently under quarantine, the city will be instituting temperature check testing every single day when police come to work. If a coronavirus case is suspected, they'll be tested. Henry Ford Health System will do up to 20 tests per day with immediate turnaround of results for police officers. And if an officer does get COVID-19, as some hospitals in the area are already over capacity and others have available capacity, the city will work to place officers in hospitals where there's room.
This next story hits very close to home to the Daily Detroit team. Community leader and consultant Marlowe Stoudamire has died of COVID-19 at the age of 43. It is not believed he had any underlying health issues. He leaves behind 2 young children and a wife. Marlowe's work in the city touched many people. I knew him personally, and my colleague Devin O'Reilly, who is our man about a town, was a friend of his. One of his many achievements was bringing people together for the Detroit 1967 exhibit at the Detroit Historical Museum. I can personally say it was one of the best and most information-packed, immersive experiences I've seen there. Stoudemire managed to wrangle resources and stories from across the city and across division lines that are difficult to bridge to make the exhibit possible. He also was a guest on our podcasts. Here's a clip from a conversation with him more than a year ago. He talked about Detroiters telling their own story and bringing people together.
There are a few key takeaways. One, we knew that if we didn't take control of our own narrative, the New York Times would come in and tell our story and probably get it wrong.
And eat lunch at Slows. And
go visit the train station, right? But the other thing was that most people don't realize is that the exhibition and all of the things that came out of the project was really driven and powered by over 500 oral histories, right? Which we call the soundtrack of the project, of people from Detroit who lived through it, people who were in the suburbs, people even who were born after and inherited the effects of it. And so one of the things that we really had to understand was that not everybody experienced it the same way. People had different perspectives, different language, and it's okay to have multiple truths in one space. I think that's part of civility. The civility is being able to listen to someone else's truth and allow them to have that truth and then figure out where you can meet them in the middle. One last thing I'll tell you is that when we started the project, I'll never forget, and I won't name the person, someone in the business community said, well, why would you pull a scab off of an old wound like that? And my response was, whatever makes you think a scab ever formed. And I think that sometimes you have to have those hard conversations, those unlikely conversations, but have a plan to pivot and start talking about the future.
Most of Marlowe's work was in acts of service people may not have widely known. Being a mentor, helping small businesses get off the ground. His social capital firm was called Butterfly Effect Detroit, and he lived it out. Daily, the idea that small acts can make big changes. He also did a series of coffee talks on Facebook, with the last one being just about a month ago. For my seat here over the last few years, he was one of the names I always heard as a person who lifted others and who was loved. Detroit's lost a great one. Rest in power, Marlowe Stoudamire.
So, what's the status of our state's food supply as the coronavirus pandemic sets in? Will we be able to get access to fresh foods from our farmers? Joining Jer and me on the line is Ernie Birchmeier from the Michigan Farm Bureau.
Ernie, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to be with you.
So, Ernie, before we get into all of this stuff, can you kind of set up what your role is with the Farm Bureau and kind of, what your role is to play in all of this?
Sure. Well, Michigan Farm Bureau is the largest general farm organization in Michigan. We have about 45,000 farmer members across the state, and our organization works on behalf of those folks every day to advocate for them, whether it's in the legislative arena, public policy arena, promotion and education type work, and trying to make life better for our farmers across the state. And I manage our Center for Commodity Farm and Industry Relations, and I'm also our livestock and dairy specialist. So I've got a team that I work with, a field crop specialist, a labor specialist, a horticulture and specialty crops person, and I handle the livestock and dairy issues. And we work with our farmers both directly and indirectly when they have issues with other commodity organizations around the state. Answer a lot of media calls and try to help people understand a little bit more about agriculture, and then work with our partners in the legislative arena and the advocacy arena, trying to assist them doing their jobs. So no day is the same. The most consistent part of it is working on behalf of our farmers across the state, who work daily to provide the food and fiber for our consumers here in Michigan and across the United States and really the world.
So it's safe to say you're the person to ask this question. What is your sense about how farmers in Michigan are feeling and doing right now with all of this?
Well, our farmers continue to farm on a daily basis. You know, the work does not stop on the farm, even though we're dealing with a disease and outbreak and a pandemic issue right now. Our farmers continue to farm. If they're producing livestock or raising livestock, they're caring for them on a daily basis. The cows are being milked to provide milk to the processing plants to be delivered to retail outlets. If they're raising livestock, they're continuing to grow them to ultimately provide meat to the retail shelf. If they're getting ready to go to the fields because springtime is upon us, the tractors are ready to roll. They're waiting for the weather to be conducive to put crops in the ground. And if they're growing fruits and vegetables, some of that operation has already started in greenhouses around the state. The fruit farmers are busy finishing up pruning trees because those trees are going to bloom soon. So operations and work continues on the farm on a daily basis, regardless of what we're going through right now.
Ernie, this is Sven. Governor Whitmer yesterday, of course, issued her stay-at-home order, a sweeping order, meant to prevent the spread of the coronavirus and flatten the curve and everything. I think a lot of people probably had the same reaction my wife did, which was, oh my God, should I go out to the store now and, load up on groceries? And we've been reading things about people, buying huge freezers even to store perishable foods. Are people right to think this way or not so?
Well, our food supply remains solid, good, consistent. We have an adequate food supply out there, and I understand the desire for people to run out and stock their shelves, so to speak. But there's several reasons for that we need to understand. First and foremost, we were pleased that the governor considered agriculture an essential and critical industry, and is allowing all of the avenues within agriculture to continue, the ability to continue to operate, because not just on the farm does that include. That includes the processors and retail and distribution and all of those channels along the way. So pleased that was recognized and that we can continue to operate and provide that food supply. The average consumer out there, if we understand where they've been getting their meals from, 51% of the meals are eaten outside of the household, whether that be in restaurants or drive-thrus or food trucks or cafeterias at workplaces, over half the meals. So as we have shifted and gone away from the ability to eat at those normal places, more and more of the meals then have to be consumed in the home. And our consumers around the country needed to stock up some shelves, and that's exactly what they have done. And at the same time, they aren't used to seeing grocery store shelves empty because that food supply has always been there. But we have plenty of food. We will continue to have plenty of food. We just need to keep all of those channels within the industry operating and functioning properly.
Have you found among your members or people working that there is some challenges in doing the transfer between, say, food for a shelf versus food for a restaurant? Because those are two, I think both me and Sven have worked around restaurants before. Those are two different types of packaging and delivery.
Absolutely. And that is why, maybe the eggs on the grocery store shelf haven't been quite as plentiful as what people are used to. Same thing with dairy. So some of those processing capacities have had to change just a bit. There are a lot of eggs, for instance, that go into liquid form into restaurants. They are now trying to get more of them into a carton and, on the grocery store shelf. Same thing with dairy. They're used to providing dairy for school lunch programs, and those school lunch programs aren't operating right now. So more of it needs to go into a gallon-sized container. So a number of those industries have shifted their production or added production, if you will, to go 24/7 to allow for the change in demand. And that's really what we're realizing right now is a demand curve shift, if you understand economics. And we're realizing market forces at their full potential right now.
Ernie, you mentioned some of the work that farmers across the state and country obviously are doing right now, trimming fruit trees, getting fields ready, planting seeds in some cases for certain crops, I'm sure. Are there any activities that are being curtailed by this coronavirus shutdown and the pandemic? Any areas where you are concerned about production levels?
Great question. In fact, we are concerned about the labor situation right now. We bring in a lot of labor into Michigan in particular. Michigan is number 2 in diversity, only behind California in terms of the number of commodities, types of food that we produce. And we bring a lot of labor in to help with that because a lot of that is hand labor. And with the Mexican border being closed, the ability to continue that supply of labor coming in is hampered right now. So we do have some concerns about that, especially for our specialty crop, fruit and vegetable industry, because they rely on a lot of that labor to help get that crop planted, to get it prepared and to get it harvested. So that is a concern. We are working with our congressional delegation to try to allow for the transfer of workers from one farm to another, because under an H-2A program right now, that is not allowed. So we need to try to have some alterations to those regulations so that we can potentially alleviate that problem as we deal with it. People are out there looking for work right now. My guess is if they went to a farm in the area and were looking for a job, there would be plenty of them available, because we do have some concerns there.
So what are some of the things, or is there anything that somebody at home can do, or things that are good practices to, keep in mind and help things go a little bit easier through this time of trouble?
Well, I would suggest, number one, be cautious. Let's not get over alarmed here. Let's work together as much as we can to be patient as we work through this. As I stated, there is plenty of food available. There will be plenty of it on the grocery store shelves. So let's practice a bit of caution as we work to fill our shelves, so to speak, at home and our freezers, and realize maybe it's best to only take what we need at that particular point in time and allow the retailers to restock those shelves on a daily basis. The other thing we can always do if we want to help Michigan farmers is, look for a Michigan farm label on some of those products if it's available. It never hurts to look around and try to support local, if you will. The local farm markets are going to remain open if people choose to buy at those venues as well. If they're operating like a grocery store, those activities will continue. If they're operating like a restaurant, those activities will not. So those venues are going to remain open as well. And I've heard and seen of a lot of people promoting, let's support our local businesses as much as possible. Now, we don't have quite as much farming in the Detroit area, but there are farms not that far away that, are processing food every day or growing food every day for some of those local processors in your region. So I guess support local if you can. Keep in mind that our farmers are out there every day, regardless of what's going on, and they do that whether we're dealing with a coronavirus outbreak or not. That's an ongoing daily task that happens without many people realizing it. So the other part that I would add to that is, out of all of this, we have consumers, I think, that are realizing that we have an amazing food supply that's there all of the time. And we've never had to worry about grocery store shelves being empty before, or where our food comes from. Because we have a luxury in this country. And maybe take a minute, step back, and if you know of a local farmer, take time to thank them for doing what they do.
Ernie, speaking of local farmers and supporting local, I'm curious about farmers markets. I actually visited a farmers market here in Royal Oak, near where I live, last weekend. It was still open. I haven't heard anything about them closing. One of the vendors that I buy a lot from was doing kind of curbside pickup, not out of their van that was parked outside. Eastern Market, the state's largest farmers market, remains open. Are farmers markets affected by the governor's order yesterday? And what are you seeing those kind of operations doing in response to coronavirus?
We have had a lot of questions in regards to farmers markets, and we have been on the phone with the Department of Agriculture on a daily basis, including yesterday when the announcement came out from the governor. We did a follow-up call with the Department of Agriculture. Farmers markets specifically was asked about, and again, as I mentioned earlier, if the farmers market is operating like a retail grocery store, selling produce and food, they can continue to operate as is. If they have restaurant capabilities and potentially are serving sandwiches or soups or foods, sit down and have a meal, those are considered a restaurant, and those functions are not able to continue at this time. So I think that's the easiest and best way to put it. I know there are lots of questions from farmers markets across the state, but working with the Department of Agriculture and the communication that we have had back from them is those normal sales, similar to a grocery store at a farmer's market, can continue. And those are great opportunities to support produce that's grown right here in Michigan.
Well, Ernie Birchmeier from the Michigan Farm Bureau, really appreciate your time today. Thank you for so much information. I think our listeners got a lot out of this.
Glad to help out and willing to help out at any time. As I stated, agriculture is our number 2 industry in the state, and we all consume or take part in it on 3 times a day, sometimes 4, and sometimes more than that, depending on what your food habits are. And remember, there's a system behind all of that food, and it happens every day. And the more that we can share the accurate information with our consumers, the better off we all are, because our food system is so critically important to all of us.
In lighter news, if you feel like you need a good stiff drink, and who doesn't, Castalia Cocktails in Midtown is selling new drink kits. Normally a basement bar and perfume shop, they're one of many businesses that are getting creative in these times of trouble. So here's what's really cool. They have all of the ingredients you need to make a cocktail frozen in little sealed cups. All you've got to do is plop these little ice cubes, flavored ice cubes, in and shake it up with your favorite brand of booze. I'm sure there are better matches for some of these than others, so we're going to get to some suggested pairings for you. Cocktail mixes include an Epiphany Lemon Sour, Siren Song Orange Sour, and a Gravitas Old Fashioned, which, Jer, I know you're personally probably most excited about, right? You love you an Old Fashioned.
Very much, sir. Very much.
The last one, the Old Fashioned, comes in a reusable silicone ice cube tray to test out a more eco-friendly option than plastic cups. I love me a good silicone ice cube tray. I've got a set of them in my freezer right now, as a matter of fact.
I have a couple of them too, one for regular size and one for those drink cubes, because there is, once you've gone to the large cubes, I think you agree, Sven, once you've gone to large cubes, you never come back.
Well, they're definitely perfect for, a splash of booze. No question about that.
For sure. Well, one of the suggested mixers for the sours is Northern Aquavit. That's a local spirit, and we've actually had the person who does that stuff on the show, and we'll link to that in the show notes.
Robin Cleveland, good guy, yep.
But Sven, what would you put with these?
All right, well, I'm that sound you hear is me putting on my bartender cap. I used to do this in a previous life. Although I will note, Jer, that the previous life in which I was a bartender was kind of before the modern era of mixology. I mean, I go to bars nowadays and I just, my jaw drops at some of the things that I see on bar menus that I don't even know what they are. I have to ask the bartender, what's a Demerara, and, what's an Amaro and things like that. Those kinds of things did not really exist. But that said, I definitely have made a lot of drinks in my days, and I'm a big fan of a lot of the classic cocktails, like a martini and margarita, Manhattan, etc. Anyway, so let's go through these. I did some research. I did some thinking about this, and actually, Jer, I poured myself a little whisper of Northern Aquavit from my cabinet just to kind of, reacquaint myself with the flavor profile, just so I could kind of figure it out. And hashtag day drinking, right?
May as well.
Anyway, so on with my recommendations. The Epiphany Lemon Sour. So this is a mix, again, coming in the ice cube form. It's got rosemary and lavender. So I'm going to actually go with, aside from, of course, the Norden Akavit, which I do think is a nice pairing with that, I'm going to go with gin. If you're a fan of gin, I think gin would make an interesting accompaniment with this one.
I love gin.
Yes, and I do too. I'm gonna, our idea here is to recommend relatively easily found spirits. Right, we're trying not to go too esoteric. So pick your favorite brand. Frankly, Tanqueray. I like me some Bombay London Dry, not the Sapphire. If you like Sapphire, that'd probably work too. I find Sapphire almost a little too smooth for a gin. I kind of like the juniper bite of a good classic London Dry gin. You could certainly use Hendrick's if you want to get fancy and spend a little bit more money. I think in the lemon sour, I think a white rum would also pair interestingly with me. I'm a huge rum fan, just like our tech guru Randy. So I would recommend light rums can be a little trickier to find, especially if you want to do something better than Bacardi, which I highly recommend. I don't think Bacardi Light is good rum. So I would recommend something like Myers Light, if you can find it, or Flor de Caña. Mount Gay makes a silver rum. Appleton makes a good silver rum. Havana Club is another one that you might be able to find at a finer liquor store. So let's move on to the second one, Siren Song Orange Sour. This one I think is going to be a natural pairing with Norden Akavit. I think that'd be really interesting. Norden Akavit's got kind of an anise character that I think would really pair interestingly with the peppery flavor profiles in the orange sour ice cube. I also would be really curious to see how this one would pair with a tequila. I think a tequila could stand up really interestingly with the peppery notes, like a mellower. I like a mellower reposado, like a Sauza Hornitos or Sauza Commemorativo. You could definitely use a Blanco or a white tequila as well if you prefer that style, but I think that would be really interesting.
Sven, the last time I drank Hornitos, it was actually on a tugboat.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin in that because you definitely need to tell me that story later on offline. I would also note that either of those first two cocktails would probably pair fine with vodka. I mean, I'm probably in the minority. Jer, I think you're with me. I don't particularly care for vodka, but that said, I recognize that it's a very popular spirit. I mean, any visit to a local liquor store with like half of the shelving space taken up to, a million different variety of vodkas proves that.
And it's difficult times, man. All you might have is vodka around the house.
Yeah, sure. So vodka would go with either of those first two. Now, the Gravitas Old Fashioned, interesting, this one. It has coriander, cardamom, and nutmeg, which are some really interesting flavor combination. I'd really be curious to try that one. I think I'm gonna have to go get some of this stuff. Jer, I may be breaking your heart here because I know you love bourbon, but I'm going to recommend not using a bourbon because I think that the kind of sour mash bourbon flavor profile would frankly overpower those kind of a little bit more delicate spices. So instead, I'd recommend, if you want to stay with a whiskey, I'd recommend like, a simple blended whiskey like Canadian Club, I think would work just fine. Or you could, if you could find them, upgrade with a rye whiskey like Dickel or a Jim Beam rye or something like that, I think would be really good. I would also be really curious to try this one with a dark rum, maybe Gosling's, Myers Dark, or Old Kraken, which is that bottle with the kind of two handles on the side and then the crazy octopus logo.
Well, here's the deal. $30 gets you 15 cubes. That's enough for 15 cocktails. So that's a pretty good mixer deal, I think, Sven, right?
For sure.
So you can find out more at castaliacocktails.com/cocktail-kit. Of course, I will put a link in the show notes. I will remind folks that the folks at Sfumato, the owners are friends of the show and longtime members of Daily Detroit. So just wanted to make sure to throw that out there.
Yep. First pickup period is Thursday afternoon. You have to pre-order this so they can get it ready for you.
And I'd mentioned, Sven, that this is a new thing, but this is the second edition. They've gotten out of beta of this to-go cocktail mixer stuff. So it seems like this is going to be a thing that they're doing. And I can personally say, as someone who has visited their bar a few times in Midtown, it's like right across the street from Selden Standard, just north, like right on the same block as Honest John's. It is a great little place. It's a basement bar. It is a great actual date bar. So once we get through this, that's where you want to take your dates. It's a great choice. And I was just thinking about when I read about this, how much I miss that place because it was just one of those little pleasures. We are done for today.
I'll admit, Jer, I feel kind of done in general.
I want to thank Christina, Daniel, Stephanie, and Jacob for being members at patreon.com/Daily Detroit. It's you all that have been powering us through this. Really appreciate your support and making sure that, we get the word out there. Not only the important stuff, but, sometimes we've got to share a cocktail too. #self-care.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together.